Hello and welcome to the Midnight Season 2 M+ tier list. This is going to be a bit of a longer video than normal. I'm going to go through every spec and talk about their strengths and their weaknesses and their potential place in the Season 2 meta. This tier list is intended for the highest possible keys because that is where the meta is determined. I'll be ranking every spec based off a number of different factors, including damage, survivability, utility, and I have simply just played a lot of PTR keys over the last 2 months. And I will give a disclaimer that tier lists are always, in fact, incorrect. There is always a lot of uncertainty during the PTR because people are playing the game for fun and not for competition, so it's sometimes hard to determine what's actually good. And of course, there will be a lot of tuning to come, mostly pertaining to raid balance. I will be ranking specs such that the S tier is specs that are incredibly likely to be meta, A tier specs have a chance to be meta, and then specs that are B tier and below are unlikely to be meta, but could still have potential and could still be good if you main them. Alright, so starting with the tier list, I'm going to rank DPS and then tanks and then healers. In the S tier, what I believe to be the best spec is Arcane Mage. Going through logs, it is among the few specs doing the highest overall damage, but it is also doing the highest single target damage to bosses, regularly doing over 200k to a boss, and during an AoE pack, Arcane Mages do full prio damage and even gain a little bit of funnel. The mage defensives are not as bad as before. They now have a stagger that gets increased when they are in mirror images. They have 2 charges of barrier baseline and an extra 4% avoidance. So living should no longer be too much of a problem for Arcane Mage. I definitely think it is more than viable and more than durable enough to work around. And it is simply the spec that seems to be doing the most damage in almost all scenarios. Now the second spec I have in S tier is surprisingly Arms Warrior. Now, Arms Warrior is not the highest overall spec. It does a little bit lower overall than Arcane and some other specs that do really high AoE damage. But it is doing a lot of single target prio that is on par with Arcane. And Arms Warrior is very good on low target cleave, think 2 to 3 mobs. And there are a few dungeons in the dungeon pool where 2 to 3 target cleave is very relevant for extended portions of the dungeon. Like King's Rest has an entire gauntlet of 2 to 3 target cleave. Ruby Life Pool's second and third boss, 2 target cleave. Now, Arms Warrior is a defensively strong spec. However, they are playing Slayer now, and Slayer is weaker than Colossus, so they aren't that strong. They do have to go defensive stance sometimes. But the way I see it is that these 2 specs are the premier prio funnel specs that also just do good AoE. I think realistically, any comp is playing at least one of these specs. There is a good chance you can play both. There are a lot of groups on PTR right now playing both Arcane and Arms and then a third. But I think you are borderline guaranteed to be playing either one or both of these specs, maybe depending on the other group members. Now to start with the A tier, which I categorize as specs that have a chance to be meta as the third spot or potentially the second and third spot. Devourer Demon Hunter I put at the top of A+. Now, Devourer Demon Hunter is a strong damage spec. It has 2 different builds. Annihilator does a lot of AoE, but low single target. And then Void Guard does a lot of single target and then moderate AoE. And Devourer does have similar strengths alive. It does have Chaos Brand, does have Darkness, and it is quite tanky. And I think this is something that is overlooked a bit recently. I think being tanky is a very big contributing factor. In Season 1, I don't think it was even considered enough until the season actually came out and you saw DK, DH living everything that other classes couldn't. In the current state, I think it's very likely that the best spec to round out a group is Devourer Demon Hunter. But the only caveat is that they have to pick between builds, so you can't do massive AoE and massive single target at the same time. Also, one thing to note is that the sims for Devourer Demon Hunter are very high, so I could potentially foresee a raid-related nerf. Now, Ele Shaman. Ele Shaman is a spec that's been getting a lot of contention. There are some logs of very high overalls with Ele Shaman. It does very good 5 targets sustained. It's no longer a burst spec, it's now a consistent spec. It falls off a little bit on high AoE, but it still does good damage, and it does good damage on single target, and is actually alright on 2 to 3 target now with the new Farseer build. The one issue in Ele's damage profile is it doesn't do much prio damage while doing AoE. However, that's not too relevant because you do have 2 potential funnel specs that could be played. And then Ele also has Sky Fury, which is a good buff by itself. And if Arms Warrior is good, then Sky Fury does help the Arms Warrior. Although Arms Warrior isn't as reliant on Sky Fury as before, because they did increase the rage gen a bit. Now, the reason I don't put Ele Shaman in S because I just think there are so many other specs that are good like it. And also, I do think the Ele Shaman defensives could contribute to maybe being a bit weird if you stack too many weak defensive specs in a group. Also to note that all male specs are overperforming by about 3% on PTR due to a bugged cantrip for male users only. Balanced Druid is a spec that I think is pretty much similar to Ele Shaman. It's a big AoE spec. It does less single target, doesn't do prior damage while doing AoE. It is providing Mark of the Wild, and Mark of the Wild has never been dropped since it's been introduced. Every single season we have played Mark of the Wild, and Balanced Druid is looking like the only good Druid spec at the moment, to be honest. So a lot of people think that Balanced Druid will just be automatically in the meta comp, but I kind of don't really agree. I do feel like Ele Shaman kind of is just a bit of a better version of Balanced Druid, and then I think there's also just a bunch of other good specs, so I don't think it's actually guaranteed that we are just playing a Druid. Like, there could potentially be a no Mark of the Wild season. And then I think, again, there could be a potential issue if you're playing a Balanced Druid and an Arcane Mage, two specs that are relatively squishy. Theoretically, you could play an Arcane Mage, Ele Shaman, and Balanced Druid. They're all providing a lot of buffs for each other, but I think that would definitely be a bit too squishy. Now, the next two specs I put in to counteract this squishiness, I have Unholy DK and Frost DK on A+. A lot of people will dislike this because of the DK being meta for a lot of seasons, but I think these specs are genuinely good. They were looking good at the start of PTR. They got nerfed, and then people kind of stopped looking at them, but I do swear they're still good. I am seeing a lot of Unholy logs where they are just topping overall, like the top of overall logs. They're doing like the most damage almost on AoE. They do prior damage. They don't do much single target. So that's the one downside of Unholy. They don't do much single target. Frost, on the other hand, is, I think the damage profile is a little bit worse. It's a bit rampy this season. Also, Frost DK a bit reliant on Sky Furies, so I think you kind of want to be playing a Shaman of the Frost DK, otherwise you play an Unholy DK. And then a Frost DK has to be melee, whereas an Unholy DK can be at full range. Now, I will do a spoiler for the tank portion of the tier list, but Blood DK is looking S tier. It is definitely looking S tier. And this is the only reason I'm not putting the other DPS DKs in S tier, because then you would be playing double DK. But I think playing double DK is fine, because when you think about it, what is the DK utility? You have personal defensives, things like AMS, that's only on yourself, so having double DK isn't really affecting that. You have AMZ, having two AMZs is good. You have grip. Overlapping on grips is probably a bit excessive. You're not really going to need 4 grips in most keys. So I think there is not that much overlap in utility between a DPS DK and a tank DK, meaning I think it is going to be entirely possible to run Blood DK and a DPS DK. That being said, it might be a bit of a damage loss considering they don't have any group buffs like these other specs. But I do think DK DPS is tanky enough, and I feel like this season kind of hurts a bit. So I can definitely see you just playing double DK, or even Blood DK gets nerfed and then you're just playing a DPS DK by default with, I feel like they're doing a lot of damage. Now I have a few specs in the A- tier, and they are specs that are all very promising, but they aren't usually meta, so I'm not really sure if they actually are going to make it. Sub-Rogue is a spec that recently got a bug fix. It did get a bug fix and then got another bug that was positive, so it is actually doing a bit more damage than it should right now. Allegedly, it's about 5% too high, but if you look at the PTR logs and then you take that 5% away, they are still doing very good damage. So I think Sub-Rogue is actually like a real contender. You kind of never know with Sub-Rogue. That is like the most historically bugged spec. It might get bugged down into a negative direction again. But it seems to be doing the most AoE and also the most single target if it stays in a state that is similar to like the one it is. The other rogue specs are also good. Outlaw, doing a lot of AoE, doing a lot of single target as well. Outlaw kind of a bit more reliant on needing a Fizz comp, needing Fizz comp style pulls. Target cap doesn't seem too relevant right now. I feel like there aren't that many massive uncapped AoE pulls. I also think there is actually a lot of prevalence of the buffs that Outlaw needs. Like, for example, with the Warrior being so good, Shamans being pretty good, likely you actually will get a lot of the buffs that Outlaw needs. And then I think Assassination Rogue is potentially a little bit of a dark horse. There's very few logs of Assassination Rogue after it got recently buffed. Not many people are playing this, but there are a few quite promising logs doing high overall and also doing very good prio damage. Not that you necessarily will need prior damage, you might not need it at all, to be honest, but Asa Rogue is doing a lot of prior damage. The only issue is that on pure single target with no mobs around, Asa is not doing that good single target. But rogues altogether, I think all 3 rogue specs are actually looking to be like quite high damage in M+ right now. But as we know, rogues kind of just always fall off, so I'm not sure if this is actually going to stay. But I definitely think there is huge potential there. And then I think the last spec that is like really looking to be potential meta is Windwalker. It looks kind of crazy, but they are doing a lot of burst AoE. There is a new conduit build. It's actually quite hard to play. There's a very intricate sequence, and you have a lot of haste and a lot of CDR, so it's very hard to get the combo right. And if you get it right, you do like insane damage on Last Burst. It's very, very good haste scaling as well. A lot of people say the single target of Windwalker is really bad. I don't think it's too bad. I think it just seems kind of middling. From players who actually know how to play the new Windwalker, it actually seems kind of middling on single target. And they actually do prior damage because they spin in their single target rotation. And because they get more CDR and AoE, they actually do gain a little bit of prior damage. And then I think with the emergence of a lot of good physical classes, I think Windwalker could have some potential, potentially like some kind of phys comp actually rises. But you are potentially getting like warrior buffs, etc. So Windwalker is gaining value there. One big issue with Windwalker is the defenses are still bad. They gained a little bit of a defensive buff, some passive defenses, but the defensives are definitely still bad for Windwalker. So they do need some focused healing, which is definitely an issue for Physcomp, because Physcomp Resto Shaman isn't really that good at focused healing. I do think Windwalker, I'm going to slot it in between Alloy and Asa. Now, I have some specs that without any big tuning changes are not going to be meta. Regrettably, I will say Enhancement Shaman is at the top of B tier. Now, it looks alright, or as always, it has Sky Fury, Poison Cleansing Totems, good, etc, etc. But I think the damage is just a bit lower on Enhancement Shaman. If you look at logs, no one is really blasting. There is no one really coming close to the overalls that Ele are doing while playing Enhancement Shaman. There are advantages of Enhancement Shaman. Enhancement Shaman actually does pretty reasonable burst now. And you can get quite lucky and do a lot of damage if you get lucky. But the RNG Doomwind's damage is definitely a downside, and you can have points where you don't proc where you need to. The one big advantage I think Enhanced does have over Ele is that it does do prior damage while doing AoE, although I just likely think that prior damage is not so relevant this season because other specs can handle it. Overall, I'd say Enhanced is probably in a similar situation and how it is in Season 1, where it is alright, and it is kind of playable, but it is clearly a bit worse than the best specs. Feral Druid is a spec that is typically played in Physcomp, and I don't think it's looking great. I think there's a lot of weaknesses. Low single target, low 2, 3, 4, 5 target. I think it is bad on any low target count and not great on prior damage. Its mass AoE is good. It does do good on mass AoE still, but I think it's not great. Now, theoretically, I think in a Physcomp, it could get outclassed by Windwalker. However, I think Windwalker does make the Physcomp a bit weaker in general, and I don't know if it really fits in to the same degree. I do think Feral is all around a weak spec that will maybe only barely hold on to its Physcomp position. And then we have Warlocks. Now, in Season 1, Warlock was actually very good, but it kind of just missed the mark of meta. And I feel like that's just because Warlock is not very desirable of a class. It doesn't really bring much, so if it's not doing the top damage, it's not really going to be meta. And I don't think Warlock's doing the top damage. Destro is actually doing very good mass AoE. There's some good Altar of Fangs logs of Destro, big AoE dungeon. I do put Destro in B for that reason. Single target's kind of mid, but it is doing actually among the best overalls of any spec. But going off of Season 1 data, I don't think doing the best overall on AoE is going to be enough for Warlock. Demo, doing a bit less AoE, but it's a bit more tempered of a damage profile. Nothing has really changed from Demo. They do the same 1 minute, just consistent AoE and single target damage, which is a nice profile, but I just don't think it's enough that Warlock is going to be good as a result. And then I think the third Warlock spec, Affliction, is actually in C tier. Now, Affliction actually does do AoE damage. It probably does comparable AoE to Demo, but the single target of Affliction is like actually very bad, and it's very bad in Sims as well, so I wouldn't be surprised if it gets buffed. Overall, Warlock, I'd say, has the potential and does do good damage, but I think it's just kind of mid and is not going to be meta. Havoc, I think, is another decent spec. I think it does decent damage all around. going to be outclassed by Devourer if Devourer stays in anywhere near a state that it is. I don't foresee a future where Havoc is meta. There are, of course, things going for it. It's defensives, it's debuff, maybe a buff and a Devourer nerf, and Havoc honestly is actually alright, but I think for now, I'm just placing Havoc in B tier. I think they're kind of forced into Felskart again, so a bit of a very bursty profile. And then I place Ret in the next slot. Now, Ret is, again, another decent spec, doing decent overalls. Not bad at all. I think Red is just in the same perpetual spot that it is in every tier, where it is like it is good. It looks kind of good, does good damage, but it's not the best. It's not good enough to be the best. So Red kind of just is just this pug spec. It is definitely better than how it was in War Within and prior expansions, though. Like, the execution sentence funnel actually is real. You look at the prio damage on burst pulls, and Ret is doing a lot of prio damage. Aug Evoker is a spec that I think actually has some hidden potential. Now, there was a nerf early-ish in the PTR cycle where they took the Bombardment CDR and basically gutted it, so breath cooldown is like double or more what it is on live. Now, everyone kind of saw that and it's like, okay, Aug's dead, there's no more Aug. But then I went and did some Aug keys and I was kind of doing okay. I was doing like average overalls. I wasn't doing turbo bad, wasn't doing tank damage. And Aug is a spec that gets a lot better when you know the routes, when you know the pathing, the routing, and you can comfortably chain duplicates. You can still chain to 2 duplicates where you can't ever get 3. There is also talk of a new Aug build where they run Chrono Water and they focus a lot more on buffs, and it also could have some potential because you are actually buffing the healer sometimes in this build, and you are giving Shifting Sands versus DR. Not many Aug mains have been on the PTR, so I don't really know the full potential. I am kind of expecting the damage to top out at a point that is not good enough to be in the meta comp, but I think Aug is probably playable and could potentially have some hidden potential. Now, one of the worst looking classes I think is Hunter, and I think all the Hunter specs are kind of close in damage and close in a midway. I will put Marksmanship at the end of B tier, and Marksmanship is a spec that was good about 2 weeks ago in PTR. It was actually really good. I was actually thinking it was the best spec in the game 2 weeks ago. Got a massive nerf. It was like 13 to 15% nerf, and I think it's kind of mid now, but it's still alright. I think it's playable. If you're a Hunter player, it definitely isn't a worthless spec, and it seems to me to be the strongest of the 3 Hunter specs. Now, I think not too far behind is BM, and I think not too far behind that is Survival. I will put those in C. I just think BM is a bit mid, Survival is a bit mid, MM looks to be the best Hunter spec, but they're all kind of mid in general. I don't think Hunter's going to be a good class next season if it stays the way it is. And they did have the 5 Hunters mark thing that was reverted, so they only have 1 Hunters mark again, which isn't a crazy raid buff or anything. Shadow Priest is then a spec that was looking good. I really think it was looking good. Like, I was playing it a lot. It felt so good. I was doing good single tag, good prio, but then it got nerfed. And then also the prio on a last stream got nerfed. And I feel like the damage is just kind of mid now. And I think if the damage of Shadow Priest is mid, I don't know if you can justify just playing it. Like I feel like you have a slow class, defenses aren't great, doesn't have a great kick. I don't think there's any real application of mass or mind soothe. So I feel like Shadow is kind of just in the eternal purgatory of being kind of mid because of the way it scales into raid and gets nerfed because of it. I just simply think the damage is not there anymore after the nerf. And the next C tier spec is Fury Warrior. And Fury Warrior is a weird spec because I think this is a spec that nobody is playing. You cannot really find any logs. There's like one good log in a King's Rest right now. I actually think Fury Warrior does do good single target and the Sims do back that up, but I don't think the AoE is particularly good, and it's definitely very outclassed by Arms. Arms is kind of doing everything and Fury is doing like maybe one thing. So I don't think Fury is ever seeing any real play. But I do think it's a spec with low sample size, so it could be better than people think, although I think at most it can only be B tier. For the other mage specs, I'm going to go and put Frost in C. I think the overall damage of Frost is okay. It's not great, but it's also not bad. It does do decent single target, decent prio, and it also does do pretty good on 2 targets. So there are some strengths of Frost, but I think overall it's just kind of getting gapped by Arcane. Also, the defensives are worse than Arcane. Arcane is now the premier mage spec for defensives, so I don't really see any reason why someone would play Frost, but I think it's, I guess, okay if they play it. Now, Fire, on the other hand, I think is a bit worse. Defenses are worse again. And I think the profile of fire is not good. You're flame striking. The logs I've seen, people are flame striking it. They do low prio damage. Whereas frost, you're actually doing some prio damage, and arcane, you're doing a lot. Fire, you are doing none. So that coupled with just not doing any crazy good overall or anything, I think just makes fire my first D tier spec. And I'm just going to go and put Devastation Evoker in D tier. Now, Devastation is another spec that has not been played much on PTR. There's no Devastation mains playing PTR. Okay, I mean, there's not many Devastation mains in keys in general, but there's no real Devastation mains playing PTR. I did see some VODs where Sang from Liquid was actually doing decent overalls in like 16s. But I don't really have much else to go off of, and I don't think like the damage profiles of Dev are good. They still have like the issue with Mass Disintegrate, they're losing pro damage. I think Flame Shaper is like dead now or something. Like realistically, I think the damage of Devastation Evoker could be good, but the spec itself is just, it's not a good M+ spec. Even when Dev did good damage, it was never even like close to meta back in War Within, and now I think it's so much worse. So I'm just going to leave it at D. I would say potentially it is maybe not as bad as it seems. Now that is it for the DPS. I think it's very up in the air what the meta actually could shape up to. And there's a lot of good specs and a lot of variables that people are used to working with that might not apply anymore. I'll go over the tanks now. Now, pretty common opinion is that Blood DK is the best tank and it's just a clear S tier. And I put it in a different category because I don't really want to confuse it with this like one or both thing. Now, Blood DK is doing definitely by far the most AoE damage. Not the most single target damage, but it is the most AoE damage of any tank. A lot of pulls, it rivals DPS. And then it is also actually quite durable. A lot of people get worked up about Blood DK, how it's going to get one-shot in hierarchies. We haven't seen that yet, and it is looking very tanky. I'm not a tank main. The one caveat is that we do get to the hierarchies that we haven't seen on PTR, so we get the 22s on live, and Blood DK actually does start getting one-shot, but we are not seeing that now, and I don't know if the patterns are there. We did just get a bug fix where Blood DK on live was taking more damage, and now it's taking less damage from having its defensive up. So this could potentially be the season for Blood DK. That being said, I do think a lot of other tanks look good, so maybe one tiny nudge in a direction and Blood DK might fall out of favor. I also do think DPS DKs also do look reasonably good and quite playable. Now, Blood DK is very strong, but I think there are some other strengths that are also pretty good. Prot Paladin, I have an A-, and I think Prot Paladin has a lot of good utility. You have Poison Dispel, and then of course things like Sack are very helpful. Poison Dispel is very good in this season. But they made some talent tree changes to Prot Paladin, and it is actually like very playable in terms of like living. Like I've noticed a lot of Prot Paladins are living pretty well. The damage is not really there compared to Blood. AoE is lower, and then single target is actually like not really great from all the logs I've seen. I think Protection Paladin has merit as like the tanky / utility tank, but I think right now with the damage differential, I don't think you can really play Prot Paladin. I think it kind of needs further tuning. Unless we get to higher keys and it's proven that only Prot Paladin can live. Not sure if that's going to be the case. And then on the other hand, I have VDH. Now, VDH, I think, is like a bit of a dark horse tank. VDH seems to do a lot of single target, and then it has Chaos Brand on top. Even more single target than Blood DK from the logs I've seen. It does less AoE, of course, nothing does as much AoE as Blood DK, but I think VDH is like the next up for the damage tank if Blood DK was to get nerfed or be unrealistic. That being said, there are holes in the VDH defensiveness from what I've heard. A lot of people complain about the RNG defensives. I definitely think it's a risky pick, but it could be like a bit of a dark horse for damage. And then the second dark horse for damage I have is Guardian Druid, but I don't know if it's on the same caliber. I think it's the personal damage from Guardian Druid is a bit below that of VDH. And the only saving grace of Guardian Druid is that Mark is pretty good, and I don't know if Boomy or any other Druid spec is going to be good. Other Druid specs are definitely not going to be good, but I don't know if Boomy is going to be good enough to be run for Mark. So maybe there's a world where Guardian gets a buff and then it becomes the Mark of the group. I don't know if Guardian is actually a good spec on its own, though. Not many people have been playing it. I don't think it's defensively like super strong or anything. I don't think it's weak, but I don't think it's strong. I don't really expect Guardian Druid to be played unless we have some real level of tank tuning, but it could potentially rise. And then we have Prot Warrior, and Prot Warrior looks like a solid spec, putting it in B. Its damage doesn't seem bad. I don't think it's terribly bad or terribly good at living. I just think it's a standard solid tank spec. I doubt it to be played because I do think arms is so good. So I think if you're playing a comp where you would want to play a warrior for some kind of buff or something, you would just be playing arms instead. But I also don't think warrior looks to be like pathetic and unplayable or anything. So I'm just going to put it on B. And then the last tank is Brewmaster, and I've not heard good things about Brewmaster. In a stealth fix at some point during the PTR, they doubled the Celestial Brew cooldowns, so they're less tanky than they were Season 1, and they already kind of got knocked down a peg in Season 1 with some nerfs. So I don't think Brewmaster is particularly good. They do good single target, but not great AoE damage. I think there is a world where they get run in physical comp. However, a lot of people that are hyping up physical run right now are suggesting that you're going to drop the Brewmaster and potentially just run a normal tank like a Blood DK or something. That being said, I can foresee any relevant change happen, and then Brewmaster gets a slight buff or something, and it becomes the physical comp tank. Doubt it'll be the meta tank. And it was the meta tank in Season 1 only really because all the other tanks sucked, and I feel like the other tanks don't suck anymore, so I don't really foresee Brewmaster to be good. It had its 1 month to shine, I guess. So I think from the perspective of a non-tank, it actually does look like it could be a balanced tank season, definitely more balanced than the start of Season 1, and I think Blood DK is potentially only at the top because it is doing overtune AoE damage. So I'm not really sure if there's going to be a nerf and maybe a shake-up or something, but I do think this is the current scape of tanks. Blood DK at the top, and then some other tanks have potential. So now onto healers. The most hyped up healer and the purported strongest healer is Holy Paladin, and this sounds kind of crazy. Like, Holy Paladin is rarely considered to be the strongest, and a lot of people are thinking it's on a pedestal above all other healers. Now, Holy Paladin is doing the most healing. There is a tier set that allows you to basically spot heal all the time. You just have infinite infusions of light that all do pretty much a lay on hands, heal someone to full. So you are kind of just like whack-a-moling and topping everyone all the time. Definitely very good at fixing mistakes. Someone gets hit by a bolt, you can just instantly heal them up to full. Very, very good in, like, if you're like pugging or like inexperienced. There's no reason why you wouldn't play a Holy Paladin with the amount of healing it does, except for the damage. Now, Holy Paladin damage is pretty low. You see Holy Paladins do around like 30k in Herald. If they play Lightsmith, they can actually do more, like around 60k. They do lose a bit of damage in Lightsmith that they have to heal, and I also think the healing of Lightsmith actually is kind of low, and you can get heal checked. So I'm not sure if you're going to end up playing Lightsmith, maybe in some keys. But I do think the big issue with HPL is the damage is low, and it's a kind of unprecedented territory. It's not unprecedented. In War Within Season 2, Oracle Disc was the lowest damage healer, and it was played as the meta healer, even though it did low damage, because it was doing something completely broken, giving people infinite absorbs. The big question I have here is that, is Holy Paladin really as broken as Oracle Disc was? Like, it's not giving absorbs, it's not really doing anything beyond that. It's not even like constantly AoE healing everyone to full. It's just single targeting people one at a time. I would put it kind of akin to Holy Priest in Shadowlands Season 4, where you're healing one person at a time, but it's really strong. You're healing them for a lot, and it just ends up being better than other healers. I just feel like I don't see the vision. I don't think Holy Paladin is S. I don't think it has enough going for it to be an S tier spec. I think you might just end up playing another healer that can heal for maybe 90% as much, but does a lot more damage. And that healer in question, I do have Resto Shaman. Now, Resto Shaman is doing pretty decent healing. You do good stacked AoE healing. And it solves the damage issue by doing about 60k personal DPS and then having Sky Fury on top of that. And Sky Fury is pretty big. The issue that arises with Resto Shaman is that your tier set is based off healing rain. So you proc healing rains, you need everyone to be standing in the healing rains. You're playing downpour, you need everyone to be standing in the healing rains for your downpour, otherwise you can't really heal them well. You don't do much spot healing, not really much concentrated single target healing. Now, I think there are some classes that need spot healing. I think Boomy would need spot healing. I think Ele Shaman would need spot healing, but you're not playing with an Ele Shaman if you're a Resto Shaman. I think Arcane Mage probably needs some spot healing. Windwalker probably needs spot healing. Now, I don't know how bad it's going to be if you drop some of these from the DPS comp. If there is a DPS comp that revolves around having a lot of squishy classes, I don't think you're playing Resto Shaman. But if you're playing a melee-focused physical comp, or even just a melee comp like DK, maybe like a Devourer or something, like you are probably able to heal pretty much everything as a Resto Shaman. So I really think that there is a world where you are playing a DPS comp around the Resto Shaman, because I think you're gaining a whole group buff and also a sizable amount more healer DPS. And they also did buff Resto Shaman damage, so if you don't have to heal a single target boss, you actually kind of pop off on it. Now, the third healer is the insane Dark Horse of the spec of Preservation Evoker. I don't think any tier can do this justice. I think in certain situations, this spec is like garbage and it's D tier, but then in the other situations, it could potentially be S tier. I'm gonna settle on A-. Now, the thing about Prez right now is it is doing a lot of damage. In fact, it's doing the most damage of any healer. It does its AoE damage pretty much completely passively while healing. Its single target damage, it doesn't do while healing, but it does a lot of single target. It definitely does way more single target than any other healer. I do think that it actually can heal. You play around Blossoms now. Blossoms consume flame. I think you can actually heal in high keys. You don't get heal checked. But the issue is it is unwieldy. You can heal, but you want people to be stacked. You don't need people to be stacked. Theoretically, there are ways to play around it, but it is very uncomfortable if people are not stacked. You have moments of weakness, you have moments of setup, and also it is just hard. It is a hard spec. You kind of need to be playing perfectly. You need to have the right setup at all times, and it's always different. For each damage event, it's like a different setup. So the way you play is like very difficult to learn and difficult to execute, and it's also just very like scary for everyone involved. People want to be playing with a safe healer. They want to feel safe. With a Prez, unless you're like a really, really good Prez, people are not going to feel safe. Now, the reason why you would play Prez, despite all this, is because it is doing good damage, like very, very good damage. In fact, I think at the end of the season, if you want a fast timer, you might want to play Prez. I do think Resto Shaman does the same damage as Prez can in the buff, but I do think Resto Shaman also has issues with healing, depending on the comp. So there's like a good comp that where Resto Shaman doesn't fit in, you could then play Prez. Now, I just don't really see the vision. I don't think it really will affect many people. Pugs are not going to play Prez. You will not want to invite Prez to a pug. And even an organized group will probably see reduced consistency playing Prez. And the only reason you want to play Prez is if it's necessary for timers. I doubt that will be the case of it being necessary, but you will get faster timers. Resil spam at the end of the season, you might see Prez rise there. A lot of people are spamming Resil keys like Resil 24 seat right now for faster times. You might see a rise on Prez at the end of the season there. I also just think if you're a Prez main and you want to play Prez, you actually can play Prez this season. I don't think it's trolling, whereas the spec is normally perpetually D or C tier, but I think it's actually looking at like it has a lot of potential now. Also a lot of good utility, Poison, Dispel, Court, Soothe, AoE Soothe is actually pretty good. I think it's looking like one of the most uncertain healer tiers for a while. I think the other healers look less relevant, but I think these three look very potential. They all have potential. So the other healers, Mistweaver was really good at some point. It was really good at some point in the PTR, but it did get nerfed by a lot. I think there's too much gaps in the healing. Your spells do nothing, so like your Shylan's Gift, your Renewing Mist, your Enveloping Mist, those all kind of do nothing now. They've been repeatedly nerfed. Your Spin doesn't do much anymore. They nerfed Spin. So now you heal with Rising Sun Kick. Rising Sun Kick was buffed a lot, so when you Rising Sun Kick, everyone gets healed for a lot. When you don't have Rising Sun Kick up, everyone is dying. I think the stop-start format of the Mistweaver healing profile is going to make it not really desirable for keys at the moment. That being said, Mistweaver does look bad in raid. The dummy dome raid testing that all the healer mains are doing for raid, it doesn't look good. So I wouldn't be surprised if Mistweaver got buffed. There is potential for it to rise back up if it gets buffed. It does have things going for it, like Poison, Dispel, Soothe actually is pretty good this season. But I am not really thinking, I don't think it's good right now at the current moment. After that, I have Disc Priest. Now, Disc Priest, I put it in C tier. I think it has more problems than people claim. It was actually a bit hyped up at the start of the PTR. Got nerfed a little bit, only a little bit since then. But I think it was a lot of it just like Disc Priest mains were playing it and then thinking like, this feels alright. I think there are issues with Disc Priest. It has its healing isn't even that great, especially its like prior healing. A lot of Shadow Men spamming was happening. Have mana issues. It's one of the few healers. I think it might be the only healer now that has like actual mana issues and no real way to regen mana. And then also it's just this priest. I don't think priest is a good class. Kind of just slow. I don't know. I don't think the priest utility is going to come in handy a lot. I don't think there's a single relevant disease spell as well. There are actually like 1 or 2 decent dominate mines, but I don't think they're like game breaking. So I think Disc is not a great spec. I also think Resto Druid is not a great spec. I'm actually kind of torn between putting this on C and D, but I think I'm gonna put it on C. Like Resto Druid is not doing good healing right now. So on Midnight Season 1 beta, it was looking OP, and then they continuously nerfed it and nerfed it. Even at the start of Midnight Season 1, I think people were overhyping it and it was actually worse than people thought. And you can see now, if you look at the Mythic stats, Resto Druid is like a 0% play rate. Like, no one in real keys are playing Resto Druid right now, and I think it's getting worse next season. Recently they nerfed it further. They nerfed regrowth because they fixed a bug with the abundance talent, but the abundance talent is now unwieldy and it's hard to play in keys because you need to have 5 rejuves up at all times. So they essentially just got a nerf to M+ for nothing. I think it looks kind of grim for Resto Druid. Now, Resto Druid is a mark provider, but Resto Druid is doing no damage. So Resto Druid doesn't do damage really if it's healing, and you have to spend a lot of globals on healing. And even if you're not healing, it doesn't do that much damage. We're seeing a lot of Resto Druids come out with like 20, 30k overalls, which then if you account for mark, brings them to like 60-ish k. And I mean, Resto Shaman does 60k personal and then Skyfree on top of that. So Resto Druid is not a good damage healer, even counting for mark. Like even if you wanted a mark and Boomy wasn't actually good and Boomy was overhyped, I don't think you'd be playing a Resto Druid because you might as well just play a different healer and not have mark. I think Resto Druid has some hope though, because it is a druid. Poison, dispel, soothe. I was gonna put it on D tier. I actually had it on D tier, but I think that was a bit overstated, because the real D tier healer is Holy Priest. This class sucks. It's never gonna be good. No amount of 5% increased healing to Holy Priest will make it good. There are some good things going for Holy Priest now. I think the mana is less of an issue. If you play Oracle, I think you actually have no mana problems. But it still just has the same like variant of like stop-start healing. You have to cast to heal. You're not really doing like massive amounts of ticking healing at any time. Prayer of Mending kind of sucks in keys. Your Priest is just not that good of a class. I think Holy Priest just is in the eternal struggle of just it needs a redesign, and until it gets a redesign or maybe some really broken tier set, this tier set kind of sucks. If it gets a really broken tier set like H-Trial, maybe it'll be good, but it's just in the eternal purgatory. So that is my summary on healers. I think it's honestly looking like a pretty diverse healer meta. There's a lot of options. I don't think Holy Paladin is doing anything broken like Mistweaver is. Like Mistweaver, you go into the massive pool, you spin, you're pulling around Mistweaver on Season 1. I don't think Holy Paladin is going to be doing anything broken in Season 2. So I feel like it's going to be a lot more diverse. I hope, at least. Of course, tuning could happen. I do think Holy Paladin, Resto Shaman, and Pres Evoker are also the top healing specs in Raid. Disc Priest as well. So I think Disc Priest might not rise because it's looking good in Raid. So maybe some tuning will come to these specs. But I think healing at the top healers actually look pretty balanced between each other. They all have their positives and negatives. The bottom ones not so much. So that's the tier list. I do think it is looking like a diverse potential season. However, I do think that there's going to be something that happens. There's going to be some tuning, and there's going to be some point of emphasis that we aren't really thinking about in the PTR. Maybe it's related to Poison, Dispel, and Soothe. Maybe it's just related to survivability and having too many squishy classes you can't survive the keys. A lot of classes could have nerfed. I can see Devourer, maybe Sub, maybe arms getting nerfed more likely than others, potentially. I kind of hope some of these classes don't get nerfed, because I do want to see some of these classes shine. Like Rogue being good, Windwalker being good would be kind of crazy, but I don't know if it's going to happen. So I guess you have to wait and see, but I do think this is very up in the air, and a lot of other tier lists are kind of looking like the same way, so it is a pretty common sentiment on this. Anyways, I do have some metacom predictions. I think in the top left, I have what is considered to be the strongest individual specs. You have massive funnel single target with Arcane and Arms. You have Shaman, which is just providing the strongest buff, and then Holy Pattern, which is like the strongest healer. And then theoretically, the Prez in theory could be put into that comp to get a little bit of extra damage. Don't know if it's actually going to happen though. I think you could have a full caster comp with Boomy, because this comp up here doesn't have Mark. So the full caster comp, I have Boomy in it, Devourer, Boomy, Arcane, and Devourer is kind of serving the role as a tanky member of the group. Maybe Boomy, Arcane's hard to heal, maybe not. Then on the right, I have some more melee comps. I have the Fizz comp, and this is a Fizz comp with a Windwalker instead of a Feral, but maybe Feral is just going to be the play, and maybe Brewmaster is just going to be the play. Maybe some tuning happens and that's the case, or maybe it is just the case anyways. Maybe the people playing physical comps are just going to play those anyways, because they're not like ones to follow the meta, right? Maybe Windwalker doesn't even work on it. And then I have a max survivability comp, Unholy, Arms, Devourer. Like you will probably not have many issues with living keys, and those are very like high damage specs at the moment. So I do think that honestly, this max survivability comp is probably the easiest comp to play. So maybe something like that is just what is more valuable. And then maybe you could have like a Rogue in, like Sub Rogue is actually looking pretty good. So you could just have like a non-Fizz melee comp. Also, this is a pretty survivable comp as well in the bottom right. They're actually these two comps in the bottom right I have are actually the same thing, huh? But I do think that it is very up in the air. I am erring towards more tanky specs being played. I am erring towards Devourer being played if it's not nerfed. I'm erring towards DK DPS being played. I'm erring away from things like Boomy and Ele, because I think living is going to be the name of the game, especially when you have dungeons like Ruby Lifepool where they're buffing things like rocks, which are already pretty hard. Now, as a disclaimer, they did say they're going to do roadmap tuning like they did in Season 1, meaning that next Friday, it's a decently high chance they have a post with tuning to some specs. It won't be as big as the one in Season 1, but there is a good chance that some specs that are looking very good for Raid might get nerfed, and some specs that are looking maybe kind of very bad for Raid will get buffed. That could have impacts on the meta and could potentially render some parts of this tier list outdated. And of course, in 3 months from now, they might buff Thrash by 200%. No, they're not going to do that again, but they might do something else like that. So tier lists are never fully accurate. Anyways, here is the final tier list. I'll leave this up at the end of the video for the people who skip to the end of the video to see. One thing that I want to do for next season, or rather for season 2, maybe like 2 to 3 months from now, I'm going to go and look back at everyone's tier list and see who got it correct, because I'm going to wager there are some things that are really wrong here. You know, in the season 1 tier list, I had Arcane Mage at the top of S. Now I have Arcane Mage at the top of S again. Is Arcane as broken as we think? The tier lists are always wrong. There's something always that is glaringly wrong. We also had Arms at the bottom of D last tier list. Last tier list, Arcane was top of S, Arms bottom of D. That really changed, didn't it?